Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 244. Well, hello, my lovely friends. How are you doing? This is the Wander Wealthy Podcast. If you stumbled on this and didn't read the title, my name is Tess Wicks, if you're brand new here, and I am the host of this show, founder of Wander Wealthy, and financial coach turned business coach to help bring more money coaches to the world so that we can make the world a better, more financially literate and confident place. And you're here today because you're probably struggling to take some action. And if you just listened to last week's episode, which maybe you literally just listened to it, or if you listened to it last week and now you're, tuning in every Thursday to the new episode, and you're like, I got to know more about this action stuff, then you're in the right place. Because I have done a good amount of research in how we can understand why we do and do not take action, and some things to help you take that action that you need. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I think so much of business and so much of the reasons why there are lots of people who don't succeed in business, and you read those success rates and they're pretty dismal, and then you go, shit, is that going to be me? Is because of this action piece, right? There's so much information in the world and it's all at our fingertips. And yet so many of us fail to do the things with it that we know we know what we need to do. It's the doing of it that is hard. So let's understand this a bit more. I have tapped into a couple of resources to help me kind of develop my steps for helping you take action. The action items to take action. One is Scott H. Young, his blog. He has a blog post, Why Action is Hard. And another one, which I hate this blog name, but I found the post semi-intriguing and semi-helpful. And it was just also a very, very detailed guide around the topic of action. But oh my gosh, saying this out loud makes me not enjoy my job. But that is startupbros.com. And he has a full guide on Overthinker's Guide to, I'm butchering it. Overthinker's Guide, Taking Action Complete Guide. At least that's what the URL is. But I'm sure if you Google that and you want to read more of this blog post, you can find that. And I will make sure to link these up in the description of this episode as well, or in the show notes. But let's just dive in, shall we? Oh, one more thing before I do. Of course, if you want to take some action and, make any bit of your life a little bit easier, I implore you to head to wanderwealthy.com. There you can join me in a couple of different things. We have the pricing formula, which can help you finally set the right price point for what you're charging in your money coaching business. And this isn't just because we're going to pull some numbers out of the sky. We're actually going to use your financial needs and goals and incorporate them into a real calculator that'll help you at least come up with a baseline price. And then from there, we can stress test it amongst your ideal clientele. So if you want a price point that's set on real data and you want to be able to calculate that, and you want access to a calculator and some really awesome trainings around pricing for inclusivity and, outlining your ideal work weeks, you can understand the capacity that you have for coaching, then I implore you to head to wanderwealthy.com. And like I said, if you want the full URL, wanderwealthy.com/pricing. It is a very, very, very low investment for you to get real results in your business. It's about the cost of a semi-fancy dinner. If you live in Switzerland like me, it's the cost of a really, really subpar lunch. But things are different in this very expensive country. But it is so worth it and one of the best investments you can make in your business. And through that investment, it'll unlock some more opportunities for you to get your hands on other action-packed trainings like my Simple Sales Strategy Masterclass, which is 90 minutes of every single thing you need to know about selling, as well as the client attraction content formula for like a 70% discount. I mean, it's insane. So wonderwealthy.com/pricing to unlock the magic vault. All right, let's talk about action. So in my research, and it was probably less comprehensive than me saying in my research really makes it sound, but I did typically when I'm writing these outlines for my podcast episodes, I use a lot of my own personal experience and what has really helped me. And I have infused this episode with that, but I've also wanted to go beyond that because I think for me, oftentimes I forget what I've struggled with previously. I think we all do, right? We talked about that in the last episode where I've become unconsciously competent, right? I've unconsciously wired myself towards taking action and just doing the things because I've almost overcome certain hurdles and blocks that, no longer get in my way. And now I no longer even remember that they were hurdles or blocks. So I wanted to do a little bit further research into like what else could be holding people back, or just to kind of reignite my memory of, I've definitely had action taking problems in the past, and I still do sometimes, but the way that I overcome them now, I can do it a little bit more quickly than I was able to do in the past because, again, I've overcome these hurdles previously, and so it's just muscle memory at this point. But with that said, I wanted to make sure that I was providing the most kind of thorough solution, I suppose, to this overall just like crippling dilemma of not being able to do the thing that you need to be doing. So in my research, I came up with kind of a couple of different categories of things that we should keep in mind especially when we're like kicking ourselves for knowing that we should be taking action, or even if you're kicking yourself for not getting results, but then knowing like, well, it's because I'm not really doing all that I can be doing. And I hate that saying, first and foremost, because anytime I, as an example, if I launch something and I don't get as many people to sign up as I had set the goal for, then I'll kind of kick myself. I'll find myself kicking myself going, well, you didn't do everything that you could have done. What if you just like utilized every single resource instead of kind of like did as much as you were comfortable with doing, right? So I'll find myself kicking myself, but then also I want to be aware and grateful for the clients that I did enroll, right? If I had a set number that I wanted to hit and then I fell below that set number, sometimes we can so fully focus on what we didn't accomplish and forget to focus on what we did accomplish. So don't forget about that. But if you still find yourself kicking yourself and you know that it's because there was more to give, but for whatever reason, you just didn't give it. Or maybe you're having a hard time giving anything at all in terms of like taking action. And I'm not saying giving to other people. I'm saying, giving to yourself, showing up for yourself, doing the things that you said you were going to do. Then we need to have a discussion. So the first, I think, realization, which I don't think is any new to anyone, is just that action is really the most highly correlated thing that will lead to your success, right? And inaction is oftentimes what leads to us not seeing the results that we want and therefore deeming ourselves a failure, right? So what's even more important to remember is that not taking action is in itself an action. And I know that that's like so meta, but actions are always derived by decisions that we make, right? And so we can decide, and we oftentimes decide to not take action, which then therefore we don't get results because results come from action. They come from doing, but we have to decide to do or we can often decide to do not. So that's the first thing, is knowing that taking action or not taking action is a choice, and we make that choice. Sometimes there are external circumstances that make it more difficult for us to make that choice, or to make the choice of to take action or not to take action. But it always comes down to a choice. And with that choice, sometimes I think we forget to consider the fact that taking action will lead to one result, and choosing not to take action will lead to another. And sometimes we get bogged down because there's also just like so much else happening and so many other choices that need to be made. I think the kind of cliche social media quote that you probably see floating around, but that I think really hits hard, is that the idea that not taking action, there's a cost to that. And sometimes we choose not to take action because the cost of taking action is typically something that's uncomfortable. But then we forget to think about the cost of not taking action, aka the cost of staying in the same situation, or the cost of staying the same, or the cost of, getting the same results that we've been getting previously. And then measuring up the discomfort. Because no matter what, if you want something else in your life, whether that be, a successful coaching business, or you want to, feel healthier and commit to maybe like a workout regimen, or just a movement regimen, or something else, right? Let's say you wanted to find the love of your life. There is the action that you can take that will get you there. And that's a decision that you have to make, right? Do I want to take that action? But there's also the decision of, never mind, I'm not going to put myself out there because putting myself out there is uncomfortable. So I'm going to not put myself out there. Okay, let's use the love of your life example, because I think it's maybe the easiest one for us to visualize together, right? If you want to meet the love of your life, like putting yourself out there in the dating world can be brutal, right? There's lots of opportunity for rejection. There is going on dates that feel like a waste of time. There is, potentially talking to someone that's really creepy, right? There's a lot of discomfort involved. But on the other end of the actions that we take to move through that discomfort, there's also going to be actions that feel easy and fun. And then we also ultimately decide, no, not what I was looking for. But then there's the highest likelihood, right? The highest correlation of success is taking the action so that you can ultimately lead to what it is you're looking for. And, sometimes it's not even the action that you're actively doing that leads to the results, but just because now you've oriented your brain to like being more willing to take these risks or to seek out the qualities that you're looking for. Maybe you don't end up finding the love of your life through these actions of going on these dates, as an example, but you find the love of your life through just being oriented to taking action and taking on more risk and putting yourself in the discomfort of being open to love. And therefore, then you run into that person in a grocery store and, accidentally exchange your oat milk for their cow milk, and then you have to like meet back up in the parking lot, and then you start talking about something and exchange numbers, and then the rest is history. But it's like orienting yourself towards success versus, like I said, when you're in that decision-making situation of deciding to take the action to go on the dates in the first place, or even 5 dates in, taking the decision to continue taking that action that, now you have lots of proof that it's not always fun and it's going to be uncomfortable. You think about the discomfort of making that decision to orient yourself towards action. And there's a lot of discomfort in that. So then you think, the easier thing for me to do is to not do it, right? Is to take no action. So I'm going to make a decision to take no action. And what we fail to do in that moment, because we're always oriented towards immediate gratification versus considering the long-term gratification of the short-term potential discomfort, we forget to consider the long-term, what's the opposite of gratification? Ungratification? The long-term side effects or the long-term results of choosing inaction, right? Choosing the immediate gratification of, oh, let's not do the short-term discomfort right now because, ugh. So we forget to consider the cost of not doing the thing, right? And that is typically, staying the same. And this is, nothing against choosing to stay single or anything like that, right? We were just using that relationship situation as an example. But revisiting that example, if you do not want to be single, right? If you want desperately to find the love of your life, then choosing to not take that action because the discomfort feels more painful. But if we haven't measured it up against the discomfort of the end result of not taking action, then we've made a grave mistake, So it's really considering the true cost benefit of taking the action versus not taking the action. And I think a lot of times we are wired for short-term gratification. What's the easy out button that we can take right now? And the easiest thing is to not do anything. So just remember to look at it from a zoomed out perspective so you can consider all of your options and what the full kind of, end of your life cost is. That's a bad way to talk about it, but here's my actuary coming in. Let's just look at the data, but really consider that. Okay. The other thing that I think can keep us from taking the action is that we have been wired since childhood to expect perfection, but also to understand that there is a real high, statistic probability of failure. So one of the things that I learned from the Scott Young article was this concept of expectancy theory. And he says, your motivation to complete a task depends both on the value of the reward you anticipate receiving, as well as your expectation that you'll actually get that reward. So, in October of this year, I gave up drinking coffee and alcohol for the month. And I know that this is something, I'm very privileged to be able to just decide to give something up like that and then choose to not fully stick to it for the entire month, or, to also have the option and choice to kind of go back to consuming both caffeine and alcohol. But in this process for me, it was really just it wasn't really to challenge myself, but it was for me, I am I like to say a 75-year-old man in a now 30-year-old woman's body. And I deal with lots of different kind of acid reflux, basically. The long and short of it is. And I know that coffee and alcohol are both triggers for that. So I wanted to challenge myself to just reset, because I had spent the 2 weeks leading up to that in Italy, where coffee and wine are both, very strong cornerstones of the culture, as well as every other trigger of acid reflux that you could think of, such as tomatoes and heavy starches and just all of it, My life is hard. That is a joke. But for the month of October, I chose to, go on a no alcohol, no coffee diet. And there were a couple days where I did choose to imbibe. Is that the word? I don't know that word. But I chose to consume. And it's really because for me, the anticipation of the reward wasn't that high, right? My reward was not to have acid reflux, which when you have acid reflux in the moment, it sucks and you're like, I'm giving all this stuff up. But at the end of the day, it's something that I can deal with when it does happen. And I don't have acid reflux every time I do enjoy a glass of wine or a cup of coffee. And therefore, for me, it was like, was I really that committed to this month of no alcohol and coffee? Clearly not. But mostly because my expectancy of the reward wasn't that high. Now, on the other hand, there's also the expectation that I will actually get the reward. And that also wasn't that high for me, right? A month without coffee and alcohol, my expectation of never having acid reflux again after a month of coffee and alcohol, I was pretty sure that wasn't going to happen. Like, I don't think that's how it works even. So, an example to share kind of why sometimes my decision to take actually an action that wasn't good for me, right, during the month of when I was trying to actually not take an action, which is funny because it's kind of flipping this entire concept on its head, but my decision wasn't there. And I think a lot of us experience this expectancy theory where not only do we consider the reward of the actions that we take and decide, is it really that high and is it really worth it to take? We also pair that reward with our actual kind of expectation of our probability of being able to receive the reward. So we go, okay, I want to have a 6-figure coaching business, but, and that might be a really high reward that you're willing to take the action for. But then you consider, but what's the probability I'm actually going to get there? And, if you stick it out, the probability is pretty high, but then you pile on all the other reasons that we don't take action, such as the, short-term discomfort for the long-term gain and all of that stuff. And we see our ability to take action plummet even further. Now, the other thing that Scott brought up was this cultural acceptance of taking action, which I thought was really intriguing. He talks about our hardwiring for ambition itself is based on our environment. This may also explain why inaction seems to happen with some areas of life, like starting your own business, but not others, like showing up to work on time. In the second case, there's a strong cultural expectation that everybody needs to show up on time to work, whereas nobody will blame you for not starting a company. So a lot of times there's kind of like what society accepts, right? The social acceptance of doing something, or even the social expectation that, like, of course you would show up to work so that you don't get fired. How dare you get fired, right? But starting a business is something that a majority of people don't do, and therefore it's not an expectation and is not widely accepted that you should be doing it. People aren't going to, well, most people aren't going to hold it against you that you're trying to do it. There are some people that will, because of either their own kind of internalization of whether they are capable of doing that or not, or if they've been burned in the past by trying to start their own business. But there's no expectation that you should. And therefore, it's easy for you to say, you know what, never mind. This was harder than I thought it was going to be. And therefore, I'm going to opt for the inaction. Versus, going to work and showing up to work on time isn't always enjoyable, but like, you got to do it. Otherwise, how dare you not? And how dare you get fired or whatever? So there's definitely a cultural component. And this goes even further down to like our subconscious programming. We have a deep internalized desire to be accepted by the culture and the community that we are a part of. And so within your culture and community, if the expectation is to maintain a job, right, and therefore you show up to work on time, even if it's super uncomfortable for you to wake up at 6 a.m. every morning and, get your booty to work, you're going to do it, because the opposite of that would potentially leave you at risk from getting cast out of your tribe and therefore being rejected. Whereas, again, the expectation of starting a business and doing some of the things that might make you uncomfortable, but that on the other side of that action of moving through that discomfort will be the results that you're looking for, no one's expecting you to do that, right? They might even be expecting you to quit. And therefore, we tend to kind of shrink to the lowest common denominator of our community and of our, of our tribe and what is not successful, what is accepted there. So, it could be different if you actually are part of a community that, especially like a family unit where everyone is an entrepreneur, and therefore you're kind of holding yourself to that expectation. That could be very different for you. But I would say a majority of us do not come from long lines of entrepreneurs, or at the very least, like if you have siblings, maybe not all of your siblings are, or if you don't have siblings, but you were raised in, some form of a community, you'll kind of orient to your community unless you choose otherwise. But making that choice is going to make you short-term uncomfortable, sometimes long-term uncomfortable. So understanding that too, I think, can help allow us to see that, like, it's not just because we're lazy. It's not just because we like to self-sabotage. It's not just because we're not cut out for this. And I shouldn't say just because. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you're not cut out for this. It's not because you enjoy self-sabotage, right? There's a lot of cultural and even like neuroscience and kind of orienting towards survival mechanisms at play here that tend to make us actually avoid action, even when we know it's not the right thing to do. Interesting. The last thing here is the accessibility of information. I see this all the time with my clients. So many people become obsessed with consuming and learning, and they fail to realize that consumption of information is the least productive thing you can do when the option and opportunity to take action is present. And we can oftentimes create the opportunity to take action. So this was something that kind of, I've had these experiences with my clients, and I've made it very, very clear that the most successful people who go through my program become obsessed with taking action versus finding all of the answers before they're allowed to take action, right? Or constantly like becoming obsessed with all of the content, even from the program, or all of the content that I've shared with them. Orienting yourself towards taking action will by far make my clients, at least, from my experience, way more successful, because they'll actually just like do the thing instead of overthink it or try to make sure that they're doing everything right. So something that I don't have his name here, but the guy from startupbros.com shared that I found really interesting. He actually shared a quote by an economist, Tyler Cowen. And he said, information isn't what's scarce. It's the willingness to do something with it. And I was like, yes, right? Oftentimes I even share with my clients, like, a lot of what you find in the Wealthy Coach Blueprint, you could Google. And I do not think that takes away the value of the content and the education I provide, because I know that I provide it in a way that is very, step by step. I know that I've spent lots of time and pulled from my own experience to share some of the things that I share. I know that I've also paid lots of money to get access to some of this higher level education that I'm passing on. So I know that the blueprint is built of proven steps and lessons and information that you need. But by far, what is far more important for me as your coach is that you do something with it. And if I can tell you, like, you could have actually Googled this entire program. It would have taken you years to pull all that information together, and you would have had to sift through lots of other totally irrelevant information. I think that's the biggest problem, right? And then you would have had to take the right action off of the right information. And that's where I think, as a world on the World Wide Web, we've really screwed up. On one hand, I think it's an amazing thing that you have so much information on your fingertips. On the other hand, it's our kryptonite, because it gives us an excuse to not do, because we have oriented and we've taught people that learning is far superior to doing. But there are lots and I learned this at a very young age. There are lots of people who are very smart, who are very well educated, who haven't seen the results that people who are, you wouldn't consider smart, you wouldn't have considered good in school, you wouldn't consider well educated, but it's because those people are oriented to taking action. So as much as I'm so grateful for my education, and I really, I know that a certain level does allow you to get ahead in life in certain ways, there's this obsession with education and information that really is to our detriment, because there's definitely a leverage point, a cap where you have to do something. There's a minimum viable amount of information that you might need, but then beyond that, you got to take the action, because that's where the lessons come from. That's where you learn the most, is through doing. I cannot stress that enough. So in this Startup Bros guide, he really touches on, the problem is no longer that we lack knowledge. It's that we don't have an effective frame for knowledge. So we have massive amounts of wasted information stored in our brain, but we don't know how to take that information and apply it. And no one's kind of holding us accountable to do that. So we were told to learn, right? We were told to learn, so we learned. What we forgot to do was apply the information. And that's a quote. I did not come up with that. And what I really loved that he said was, paradoxically, taking ignorant action will make your research much more effective. And I find this all the time in the online space. And I don't think it's right, but I think it's fascinating that some of the most successful coaches, right, or online business owners are not necessarily the smartest. They're not even necessarily the best coaches. They have, and I wouldn't even say they're necessarily the best salespeople. They just are a little bit more ignorant. Now, I'm not saying all of them, and I'm not saying this applies to everyone by any means, but I do think, from someone who just completely overthinks everything, I know when I stop thinking and I just do, I always get better results, right? If I stop trying to make it perfect and I just put it out there, knowing that there's a spelling error, and knowing that, something isn't going to be fully perfect, that's when people actually sign up to work with me. And then we can focus on, perfecting it. That's when your research is much more effective, when you can actually apply it. So there's so many coaches holding themselves back because they don't know if they know enough. Well, you can research until you're blue in the face, but you don't know what you're going to need to know until you actually get clients in the door and face the problems with them, right? There's so much that we don't know, and trying to seek it out to prepare and ready yourself, and then continue to do that until you're really ready, which no one tells you when that happens, you'll quickly learn that then you get clients and you go, oh, all the research in the world couldn't have prepared me for this because this is such a unique situation. But hey, now I know what I need to go and figure out. I call this just-in-time learning. And I think, beyond just what you need to know as a coach yourself, there's so many other ways that it pops up. And I know it is such a paradigm shifting kind of double-edged sword, right? That a lot of the people who, get the most clients and make the most sales and have the most successful companies aren't necessarily the best coaches. They're not necessarily the most, well-educated in the field, but they've either mastered sales and marketing, or they don't know what they don't know, and therefore they just take the action that they need to take and put themselves out there, and that's what gets them the results. So I'm not saying to do that. I'm not saying to show up completely ignorant, but your thirst for more information before you're allowed, before your unconscious or subconscious is telling you that you're allowed to do the thing, is holding you back. And it's a paradox But I think it's one that if you can be aware of it, it'll help a lot, right? Because you might be looking around at other people online and you might think to yourself, and I think I'm going to say it because I think we're all thinking it at one point or another. You might see someone else and you go, I know way more than them, or like, I have to be a better coach than them, or whatever. And comparison is the thief of joy, but you've probably experienced something like that and you've thought, what do they have that I don't? They can't have much more than what I know, or, I worked in finance and they didn't, so how could they know more, or whatever it is that you're saying to yourself. But you see them working with all the clients, you see them making all the money, you see them doing this full time. And it likely could be that it's just because it's not because they know more than you. It's because they just took the action before you did and didn't overthink it, didn't, force themselves to wait to feel ready. They just decided they were ready, went out, and now they're applying the research or going out and doing the research with the just-in-time learning that they need to achieve. Okay, so I think we've beat this one to death. I'm not going to say what we beat to death because I feel like that idiom is gross. But I think we've went all out. And here I want to just share with you now what you can do if you're really feeling stuck. Okay? The first thing, and I'm a fan of this, make time for action taking. Schedule it out in your calendar. And commit to commit. Commit to show up for yourself. Right? Be a steward of what you say you're going to do and do it. Now, here's the mistake. I don't want you to fill your calendar chock full with all the things you need to do. I want you to practice taking action, taking these small steps of courage, getting uncomfortable, right? So put action taking blocks in your calendar, but leave space in your schedule for buffers, for being able to move things around, and only commit to 2-hour time blocks maximum. So if you're going to commit to 2-hour time blocks for taking action, I'm assuming you have lots of free time in your day, but not everyone even has the luxury of 2-hour time blocks. But if you did, and if you had an entire day, I would probably only do like a maximum of 2-hour time blocks. That's 4 hours of work. That's 4 hours of action taking. But that also allows for wiggle room. Now, if you don't have 4 hours, right? If you only have 1 hour a day, commit to 30 minutes. Like commit to half of the time that you actually have available to taking action. Therefore, if you don't get to it one day, you can move it. You can reschedule. You can move into buffer periods. Because I think sometimes we don't take action because we're too overwhelmed by a packed schedule. And we've already anticipated not being able to get something done in the time allotted. And therefore, we don't think it's possible to even do. So why even start, right? I used to do this all the time when I would study for my actuarial exams. I would go, well, an exam is 3 hours, so I need 3 hours of study time. Otherwise, what's the point of studying? And that would just kill me because it's ridiculous, right? 30 minutes of high quality study time and doing that, for 6 days in a row would get me to the same 3-hour chunk. But if I can't find a 3-hour chunk in 6 days, then I'm like, what's the point? That's sad. So know that, you might be taking micro actions, but micro actions are what lead to our big time results. A lot of the time, it's showing up every day. It's doing something every day, even if you only have 10 minutes. And I think, when you can already start to anticipate yourself falling behind because you don't have enough space in your schedule to play catch up, that can also become discouraging. So leave buffer room in your schedule. Block out the times when you want to take action, but then leave enough room so that if you don't get to it, you give yourself some grace and you say, hey, I can pick up on this tomorrow. Okay, the second thing to do when you're having a really hard time taking action is to specify what you're going to be doing during those action-taking time blocks. This is another common mistake that people make is they'll just say okay, if you are having a hard time creating content, because we've been talking about that a lot, you might just put like, create content or create social posts on your action time block. Or maybe you just block it out and say, this is a content creation time block. But what I want you to do is get specific about what it's going to take to get the thing accomplished. So if you write things down, even for time blocking, I want you to determine what the end goal is for the task and then work backwards. What needs to be done in order for the task to be fully complete? Like what small thing? And then what needs to be completed for you to move on to the last thing that it takes to get the task complete? And then what needs to be completed for you to move on to the second last thing? And so on and so forth. So, a generic example I will use is working on a podcast. So if I just put like work on a podcast is my goal for this 2-hour action taking content creation time block is like work on my podcast, right? That's so general and vague, and it doesn't tell me anything specifically. And therefore my brain is like, well, first of all, what am I supposed to do? And second of all, that seems like a really big project because it is vague. So it makes me think of the entire podcast production schedule of everything. And therefore, then I kind of overwhelm myself, and inaction sounds like a lot more pleasing option in that moment, right? And I'm always oriented to take the easy way out. So instead, when I'm putting things in my calendar, the first thing I'll do is determine like, what do I want to get done? What's the end goal? And maybe it's not what's the end goal for today, but what's the end goal by, the end of this week? And if it's, okay, I need to get 4 episodes finished and uploaded for my podcast editor to take and record, then I need to back out of what it takes to get those episodes completed, right? So I have to upload the episodes. Before that, I have to get photos for the episodes so that I can like fully kind of sign off on this is ready for you to edit and upload and produce and be done with, right? But I have to upload the episode recordings and get photos for the episodes. And those are 2 very different kind of parts of my brain of tasks that I need to accomplish. Like the photos, sometimes I have to do a self photo shoot. So there's a lot of things that are involved in getting photos for the episode, aside from just uploading the raw media file for the episode. Okay. But those are 2 things. Before that, in order to upload the raw media file, I need to record the episodes. Okay. Before that, in order to record, I need to have like an outline or notes. Sometimes I need to do research. So I'll probably do that. Maybe, usually it's a little bit of a mix, but oftentimes it's just to create notes and a quick outline so I can get that done in one kind of action sprint. But sometimes I need to do additional research, like for this episode, which took me a little bit longer. And I actually split it into kind of 2 note-taking action sprints because some days I'm not in the mood to do research, but I can make a rough outline of what I think I want to talk about and then fill in the details with research later. And before that, I need to ideate kind of the topics for the episodes. So breaking those down, I have like 5 tasks that I've broken down the end result of having 4 episodes recorded and uploaded, ready to go. So then what I can do is I can actually, now that I've worked backwards, I start with the first one thing that I did too that will knock down the next domino, right? If it's a domino effect, I got to complete one domino so I can knock down the next one. So then I will go in and I'll determine, okay, let's say I have a 2-hour block to work on podcast episodes. I will determine, what is realistic for me to complete in this 2-hour block. Maybe that's to complete the ideation, the titles or the themes or the topics of what I'm actually talking about across these 4 episodes. And I like to do that as a batch, right? 4 episodes at a time or more. But usually I do a monthly batch. And I like to do that because it also helps me determine what I'm going to talk about in the other episodes and make sure that there's a variety, or if we have a theme for the month or for that chunk of episodes, it just makes sense. So I'll ideate all 4 of them. It uses the same part of my brain, and I can also have some strategic planning in terms of my content happen at that time as well. from there, if I have enough time in my time block, I'll also move in the other specific task, which is now I'm going to draft notes for each of these episodes. But I won't have a goal of drafting notes for all 4. I'll actually break it up and go draft notes for episode 244, draft notes for episode 245, draft notes, and I'll do that and create their own standalone tasks. That way, now I have wiggle room. Like, I haven't even committed for my 2-hour time block to do those things. I just wanted to ideate the 4 episode titles, but now I have space to actually pull in more and get ahead of schedule, because maybe I'll have actually scheduled out those 4 individual episode notes in, tomorrow's 2-hour time block, or whenever I'm going to revisit, another 2-hour time block of episode or podcast creation. But I think having specific things really takes your brain and goes, okay, no, it's not this whole big production of doing a full episode from start to finish and doing 4 of them, right? It's all you have to do is come up with 4 episode topics. Like, that's so easy. I can do that I could do that in a second, which obviously it takes me more time, but I am so much more motivated and likely to actually take on that task than I would if it was just like work on the podcast or even complete 4 podcast episodes. Because the idea of me completing 4 podcast episodes, recordings and all, in 2 hours is like, it's not even going to happen. I mean, I'm doing a content batch kind of time block. And my goal is just to record last week's episode and this week's episode. And I'm bumping up on my 2-hour timeline. So I need to wrap this up. But that's what I mean, is like break down, especially because when it comes to taking action, you know what you need to do, but you might be overwhelmed by the whole process of it, or by how long it really takes, or by, it's such a bigger thing than you thought. So break down, and you can start from the end if you know what the process entails and work your way backwards to determine smaller kind of task-oriented things that you can chip away at, and you're going to make far more progress. Okay? The third thing that you can do, this is a good one, and this is going to totally change it up. It's not about like, productivity or time management. It is truly like to change your mind. But doing this, I think, will help you enormously. And I believe this is what helped me kind of become unconsciously competent in action taking, right? Unconsciously oriented, that I then had to kind of revisit what life was like when I had a hard time taking action, is to orient your identity to be one of taking action. And this comes with, practice. So if you have a daily practice of taking action, especially taking uncomfortable action, but again, get specific, create buffers, but just do it, you will start to develop naturally this identity, right? So practicing frequency, but it can also be through, I don't want to say severity, but like through significant events where then you just like take on the identity of being an action taker. I think one of my favorite examples is motherhood. I am not a mother, but like my day-to-day life is so easy right now, like, or at least it's, I think, and I'm sure mothers would be like, yeah, it's easy. You like, if you only knew what it would be like if and when you decide to have kids, like my life is easy. So I have a huge fear of actually becoming a mother, becoming a parent, because I'm like, damn, it's going to be really hard and I won't get to be as lazy and selfish. But it's such an intense kind of, I don't want to say severe, but if we're talking about like frequency and severity, I feel like those are used in other contexts. But it's such an intense event that your identity automatically changes, right? You go from I am not a parent to I'm a parent. And all of a sudden, your identity just changes in an instant. So you don't have to practice being a parent, although I think there's like some good, probably research and practicing to be a certain type of parent, but you have to practice being a parent. You go from I am not a parent to now I am a parent. I'm sorry, that was weird word jumble. Now I am a parent, and your identity changes immediately. And now all of a sudden it's like, you don't have this fear of, am I too lazy to be a parent? Or, will I not be able to be selfish anymore because now I'm a parent? Like, you're just a parent. And now you have something so intense to like take care of and make sure that it survives and, feed it and bathe it and help it grow and develop throughout its life. And now you're just a parent and you show up and that's your identity, right? It can change in an instant. So there are situations where your identity changes to be action oriented. And I think, also being a parent, you might just become like an action oriented person as well, because that like one thing and one aspect of your life can bleed into other aspects, where it's like parenthood might help bleed into the way that you show up as an entrepreneur, if that's what you're working towards. But on the other hand, you might just have to practice. And especially if you don't know or can't leverage some of those other intense situations that could help you reorient your identity, you might just have to practice it. But I think identity is super important. I've talked about this in the past, but I don't know, I don't know who's listened way, way back when, but I talked about this idea of setting whoopee goals. Maybe I even talked about it on my YouTube channel. I don't remember. It was back, when I was full-time money coach. But whoopee goals are a concept and a way of setting goals that's an alternative to SMART goal setting. And Ben Bergeron, who's like a very famous CrossFit coach that my husband is obsessed with, he introduces whoopee goals. And then my husband introduced him and this concept to me. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so important to talk about. But whoopee is an acronym, and it stands for wishing, hoping, outcome, obstacles, plan, identity, execution. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but it's really just like a way of goal setting. So you start with your wishing and hoping, and then you determine your outcome. But the two things I want to touch on are the obstacles and the identity piece. So after you determine your outcome, you then backtrack and go, well, what are all the obstacles that I can foresee getting in my way here, right? What's going to derail me? And you just start to jot those down and kind of like pre-brainstorm what those could be. Obviously, there's some things that could fall outside of those obstacles that would present as their own obstacles, but you can only do the best with what you know and what you could create or imagine. From there, you can create your plan. So, all of us love to plan, right? The planning is the easiest part, but, it's the executing that's the hardest, which we'll get to. But you create your plan, but then you also create like a plan for who you are going to be now, right? Your identity. Because you have to decide, who are you going to be when all the obstacles that you just wrote down, when those come up? Who are you going to be in that moment? Because it's not for a lack of planning that we don't hit our goals. It's not for a lack of wishing and hoping. It's not for a lack of excitement. It's for a lack of taking action and doing the thing when the thing is uncomfortable, and knowing that there's an easier option, which is to not do it, right? In the fitness world, it's like, it's having the identity of being the person. Who are you going to be when it's raining outside and you have to wake up and go for a run? Because that's part of your plan, right? Who are you going to be when you're posting on social media and a hater comes along? Or when you're posting on social media and you've been doing it for 3 months and you haven't gotten a client yet? Who are you going to be? And orienting your identity towards action, and also you can orient your identity towards being the type of person who, doesn't let the haters faze them, or who knows that if they keep and continue to take action and they're persistent and consistent, that the clients are going to come. Orient your identity towards that instead of not doing so and therefore choosing the easier route, which is just, throw in the towel, not take action, not continue to put yourself in the discomfort of action taking. When you orient yourself towards action, what you're doing is you're creating your own momentum. You're creating your own motivation. You're deciding before you have to decide. You're deciding to take action before the opportunity to decide to take inaction even happens. You're the person who goes for the run, rain or shine. You're the person who shows up and continues to show up, knowing that what you're working towards is inevitable if you keep doing the work. Now, that's not without the support that you probably need and crave that you can surround yourself with. That's not without having a mentor or a therapist or a supportive partner, potentially all of them if you can. But it's still also deciding who you're going to be in those moments. And then, of course, there's execution, the actual taking of the action. So had to leave it on that, had to leave it on identity piece, because so often what we do or do not, we choose, right? We make a choice to do or do not do them. And oftentimes that choice can be made because we're just naturally, subconsciously choosing the least painful, easiest route. But that's not always the best. And we know that. So go out there, take the action, be brave, feel the fear, do it anyway. Let me know what you're working on over on Instagram. Send me a message. I'm at Tess_Wicks. Just tell me what you're working on and I will cheer you on. I'll help you make sure that you're taking that action. And I want to be there to support you, be your biggest cheerleader. So you're doing brave things. And I know it's not always easy, but you're here and you have the goals and you have the desires. So I am proud of you for pursuing them and for orienting your identity to be an action taker. So hit me up on Instagram. Like I said, Tess_Wicks. If you want to get into any of what we have on offer right now, go to wanderwealthy.com, check out the pricing formula, the client attraction content matrix. If you have questions about any of those, you can send me a message. But it's time to take that action. And I cannot wait to support you along the way. To get at the show notes of this week's episode, head to wanderwealthypodcast.com/podcast/episode 244. And until next time, I hope you wander wealthy.